The sun sets over the ruins of a once mighty empire. In the 6th century, the light of Rome flickers in the east, held together by the will of one man and the sword of another. This is the story of Flavius Belisarius, a soldier of humble origins who rises to become the shield of the Mediterranean. He moves across the landscape of history like a ghost of the old republic, fighting for a dream of a restored world. From the dusty plains of Persia to the gates of Rome itself, his life is defined by impossible victories and the complex burden of absolute loyalty. We follow him through the golden halls of Constantinople and the frozen mud of the battlefield. Here, in the quiet of the night, we trace the footsteps of the last great Roman general as he attempts to rewrite the fate of an ancient empire. The sun dips below the horizon of the Marmara Sea, casting long, amber fingers across the marble skyline of Constantinople. This is the year 527. While the original Rome on the Tiber River sits in the shadow of its former self, governed by barbarian kings and surrounded by crumbling monuments, this new Rome is a hive of golden light and frantic energy. The air here is thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive incense, and the salt spray of the Golden Horn. It is a city of 1,000,000 souls, the beating heart of an empire that refuses to die. Deep within the great palace, the flickering light of oil lamps dances upon the walls of the imperial audience chamber. Here, the floor is a sea of polished porphyry and verde antique marble. The man who sits upon the throne is Justinian. He is a man of restless intellect and iron will, born a peasant in the provinces of Illyricum, but now the master of the Roman East. He does not sleep much. He is known as the emperor who never rests, pacing these halls in the quiet hours, his mind consumed by a singular, impossible vision. He looks toward the west, across the Adriatic, toward the lost provinces of Italy, Africa, and Spain. To Justinian, the Mediterranean is not a collection of separate kingdoms, but a Roman lake that has been stolen by usurpers. Standing in the shadows of this same palace is a young officer of the imperial guard. He is Flavius Belisarius. He is tall and well-built, with a steady gaze that suggests a calm inner fire. Like the emperor, he hails from the rugged lands of the Balkans. He is a member of the Belisarius, the elite household troops who serve as both bodyguards and a private army. At this moment, he is merely one soldier among many, yet there is a quality in him that Justinian has already begun to notice. It is a rare combination of tactical brilliance and unwavering loyalty. In an age of palace coups and shifting allegiances, Belisarius is a man who understands the weight of an oath. The world that Belisarius inhabits is one of profound transition. The ancient world is fading, and the medieval world is not yet fully born. The Roman legions of old, with their rectangular shields and iron discipline, have evolved. The army is now a mosaic of cultures and styles. There are Isaurian mountaineers, Thracian infantry, and, most importantly, the heavy cavalry known as cataphracts. These riders are encased in mail and scale armor from head to toe, carrying both the long lance and the powerful composite bow. This is the new face of Roman power, a military force designed to survive in a world of swift horsemen and shifting frontiers. As the night deepens over the capital, the sounds of the city begin to soften. The shouting of the vendors in the Augustarion fades, and the bells of the churches chime for the late vigils. But the peace is an illusion. On the eastern frontier, the Sassanid Persian Empire looms like a mountain of iron. To the north, the Huns and Bulgars test the fortifications of the Danube. To the west, the Vandal and Gothic kingdoms have grown wealthy on the spoils of the old empire. The Roman state is a fortress under siege, and its walls are showing cracks. Belisarius spends his hours studying the maps of the world. He understands that the strength of an empire lies not just in its walls, but in the mobility and spirit of its men. He has spent his youth on the borders, learning the ways of the nomadic archers and the heavy shock troops of the East. He sees that the traditional Roman way of war, which relied on the slow, grinding advance of infantry, is no longer enough. The enemies of Rome are fast, and they strike like the wind. To defeat them, the Roman general must be even faster. He must be a master of the terrain, a student of the enemy's mind, and a leader who can command the devotion of men who are often little more than mercenaries. In the year 528, the opportunity for Belisarius to prove his theories arrives. He is appointed as the commander of the Roman forces in the east, tasked with defending the fortress of Dara against the Persian tide. It is a daunting assignment for a man still in his 20s. The Persians are the ancestral rivals of Rome, a sophisticated and ancient power with a military machine that has humbled many emperors. They bring to the field the great king's immortals and massive war elephants that shake the very earth. Before he departs for the frontier, we see the atmosphere of the imperial court. It is a place of whispered conspiracies and immense wealth. Justinian has recently married Theodora, a woman of extraordinary beauty and even sharper intelligence. Together, they form a partnership that is unprecedented in Roman history. Theodora is not merely an empress consort, she is a co-ruler in all but name. She recognizes the talent in Belisarius, and she understands that if Justinian is to realize his dream of reclaiming the West, he will need a sword. Belisarius is to be that sword. The journey to the eastern frontier takes Belisarius away from the silken comforts of Constantinople and into a landscape of sun-bleached stone and dust. The heat is relentless, and the borderlands are scarred wasteland of raided villages and abandoned outposts. Here, the young general begins to mold his army. He does not just give orders, he trains alongside his men. He shows them how to coordinate the fire of the horse archers with the charge of the lancers. He instills in them a sense of professional pride that had been lost during decades of stagnation. As he stands on the ramparts of Dara, looking out toward the Persian lines, Belisarius is the embodiment of a dying flame being fanned back into a roar. He carries the heritage of the Caesars, but he is unburdened by the arrogance that led to their downfall. He knows that his numbers are fewer than the enemy. He knows that the odds are stacked against him. But he also knows that the Roman spirit, when guided by a singular mind, is a force that can defy the logic of numbers. Back in the capital, Justinian waits for news. He spends his nights in the library, poring over ancient legal codes and theological treatises. He is rebuilding the law, and he is rebuilding the city. He wants to create an empire that is unified by one law, one faith, and one emperor. But he knows that laws are only as strong as the power that enforces them. His eyes frequently turn to the east, where his young general is about to face his first great test. The shadows of the eternal city are long, stretching across centuries of triumph and tragedy. The people of Constantinople call themselves Romans, but they speak Greek and worship in a way that would be foreign to Augustus or Trajan. Yet, the dream of Rome remains a potent and intoxicating drug. It is the idea that civilization can be ordered, that the chaos of the world can be tamed by the rule of law and the strength of the eagle. Belisarius is the guardian of this dream. As he prepares his men for the coming battle, there is no fanfare, no grand speeches to the Senate. There is only the sharpening of blades and the checking of saddlery. He is a professional in an age of amateurs, a man of quiet competence in an age of loud boastings. He watches the horizon, where the dust clouds of the Persian cavalry begin to rise like a gathering storm. This is the threshold of a new era. The story of the last great Roman general is beginning to unfold. It is a story that will take him from the burning sands of Mesopotamia to the frozen peaks of the Alps, and from the palace of the Vandals in Carthage to the gates of Rome itself. It is a story of impossible victories and heartbreaking betrayals. It is the story of a man who fought not for his own glory, but for the ghost of an empire that he believed could still be saved. The night in Constantinople is finally at its darkest. The torches on the city walls flicker in the breeze. The great cathedral of the Holy Wisdom is still under construction, a skeleton of stone rising toward the heavens. Somewhere in the distance, a lone sentry calls out, his voice echoing through the empty streets. The city sleeps, unaware that the fate of the Mediterranean world is being decided in a dusty camp hundreds of miles away. The shadows of the past are deep, but the light of a new day is coming. And in that light, the name of Belisarius will soon be carved into the foundations of history. He is the bridge between the old world and the new. He is the defender of the new Rome and the restorer of the old. As he lays his head down for a few hours of rest before the battle at Dara, he does not dream of gold or power. He dreams of the maps, the movement of horses, and the silent, enduring strength of the Roman shield. The campaign is about to begin, and with it, the long, arduous journey toward a lost glory that only he has the courage to reclaim. The year is 527, and a new era dawns upon the city of Constantinople. Justinian has ascended to the throne of the Roman Empire, inheriting a realm that is wealthy but fragmented, proud but surrounded by enemies. To his side, he calls a young man whose name is not yet known to the histories of the world, but whose presence is already felt within the imperial palace. This is Belisarius. He is a man of the frontier, born in the rugged lands of Thrace, a region that for centuries has produced the iron heart of the Roman military. He does not carry the arrogance of the old senatorial elite. Instead, he possesses a quiet, observational intelligence that sets him apart from the boisterous generals of his day. Justinian recognizes a kindred spirit in Belisarius. Both men are outsiders in their own way, driven by a singular vision of what the empire could once again become. While the emperor dreams of laws and cathedrals, he knows that such a legacy requires the security of the sword. The most immediate threat lies to the east, where the Sassanid Persian Empire looms like a shadow over the Roman provinces of Mesopotamia and Syria. The borders are a constant friction point, a landscape of dust, heat, and fortified outposts where the two greatest powers of the late antique world clash for supremacy. Belisarius is sent to the eastern frontier, given command of the fortress city of Dara. This is a testing ground. The Persians are masters of cavalry and siegecraft, led by commanders who view the Romans as a fading power. But Belisarius is not interested in traditional Roman defensive posture. He begins to innovate. He understands that the strength of the Roman legion, the heavy infantry that conquered the world, is no longer sufficient against the swift and deadly horse archers of the East. He begins to cultivate his own private regiment, known as the Belisarius. These are elite soldiers, armored in heavy mail, equipped with both the long lance of the cataphract and the powerful composite bow of the steppe nomads. They are a hybrid force, designed to be versatile, lethal, and loyal to him alone. In the summer of 530, the test arrives. A massive Persian army, numbering nearly 50,000 men, marches toward Dara. They are confident, expecting an easy victory over the smaller Roman force of 25,000. Belisarius, however, has spent his time studying the terrain. He knows he cannot win a traditional pitched battle in the open field where the Persian numbers will overwhelm his flanks. He orders his men to dig. Across the flat plain in front of the city walls, a massive complex of trenches is carved into the earth. It is a radical departure from Roman tactical norms. The trenches are shaped like a large letter U, with the open end facing the city and the closed bottom facing the enemy. This geometry is designed to funnel the Persian cavalry into a kill zone, stripping them of their mobility. The sun beats down on the day of battle. The Persians advance in two massive wings, their silver and gold armor glinting in the harsh light. At their center are the Immortals, the elite guard of the Persian king, men who have never known defeat. They charge with a sound like rolling thunder, their arrows darkening the sky. But the Roman lines hold. Belisarius stands on a small hill behind his center, watching the flow of the battle like a grandmaster at a chessboard. When the Persian right wing breaks through the first Roman line, it seems the day is lost. But this is exactly what Belisarius has anticipated. As the Persians pour through the gap, they find themselves caught in the narrow corridors created by the trenches. Their horses stumble, their momentum vanishes. Suddenly, from the hidden folds of the landscape, the Roman heavy cavalry charges. It is a coordinated strike of devastating precision. The Persian flank is shattered. The Battle of Dara is a revelation. It is the first major Roman victory over the Persians in a century. The news ripples through the empire and back to the capital. Belisarius is no longer just a promising officer. He is the man who did the impossible. He has proven that the Roman military can evolve, that it can outthink and outfight the most formidable enemies of the age. Yet, the life of a general is never a simple trajectory of triumph. A year later, at the Battle of Callinicum, the limits of his command are tested. In a grueling struggle along the banks of the Euphrates, his troops, exhausted and thirsty, are pushed to their breaking point. The battle is a bloody stalemate, and though the Persians ultimately retreat, the Roman losses are heavy. Belisarius is recalled to Constantinople. In the eyes of the imperial court, his star has dimmed, if only slightly. He returns to a city on the edge of madness. Constantinople in the early 6th century is a place of deep divisions, centered around the two major chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens. These are more than sports fans. They are political parties, street gangs, and religious factions all rolled into one. In early 532, a botched execution of members from both factions sparks an unprecedented wave of violence. The city erupts. This is the Nika Revolt. 4 days, the capital burns. The Hagia Sophia and the Senate House are reduced to ash. The rioters roam the streets, chanting Nika, which means victory. They demand the deposition of Justinian and the crowning of a new emperor. Inside the great palace, Justinian and his court are besieged, their authority collapsing as the city guards join the rebels. The emperor is ready to flee. He has ships loaded with treasure at the harbor, ready to sail into exile. It is his wife, Empress Theodora, who famously shames him into staying, declaring that the imperial purple makes for a fine burial shroud. But words alone cannot save the throne. The emperor needs a sword. He turns to the two men he trusts most, Mundus, a rough Illyrian general, and Belisarius. Belisarius is tasked with a grim and terrible duty. He must lead his loyal troops into the heart of the city to crush the rebellion. The rioters have gathered in the massive hippodrome, a stadium capable of holding tens of thousands of people. They are celebrating, believing they have already won. They are unarmed for the most part, a chaotic mass of angry civilians. Belisarius moves with cold, professional efficiency. He leads his soldiers through the narrow side entrances of the stadium. At a signal, the doors are barred. The Roman veterans, clad in full battle gear, draw their swords and advance into the crowded tiers. What follows is not a battle, but a massacre. By the time the sun sets over the smoking ruins of Constantinople, 30,000 people lie dead on the stone floors of the hippodrome. The Nika Revolt is over. Justinian's throne is secure, but the cost is a city soaked in blood. For Belisarius, this is a transformative moment. He has saved the empire from within, proving his absolute loyalty to the crown. He is now the indispensable man. However, the horror of the event leaves a mark. He is a soldier of the frontier, a man of the open field, and the butchery of his own fellow citizens is a burden he will carry. In the aftermath of the riots, the mood in the palace shifts. Justinian, now undisputed master of the East, looks toward the West. He looks toward the lost provinces of Italy, Africa, and Spain. He sees an empire that has been truncated, its heart ripped out by the Germanic tribes that settled in the ruins of the Western Roman Empire. He believes it is his divine mission to restore the glory of the Caesars, to bring the entire Mediterranean back under Roman law. This grand ambition requires a commander of extraordinary skill and unwavering devotion. The target is North Africa, currently held by the Vandals. The Vandals are Germanic people who crossed the Rhine decades ago, marched through Gaul and Spain, and carved out a kingdom in the wealthy provinces of what was once Roman Carthage. They are masters of the sea, their fleets terrorizing the Mediterranean. To many in Constantinople, an invasion of Africa is a suicide mission. The last time the empire attempted such a feat, it ended in a catastrophic naval disaster that nearly bankrupted the state. Justinian's advisors plead with him to abandon the plan. They remind him of the costs, the risks, and the sheer distance involved. But the emperor is unmoved. He has his general. Belisarius begins the preparations for the African expedition. He is now married to Antonina, a woman of great influence and controversial reputation. She is a close confidant of the Empress Theodora, and her presence at Belisarius's side ensures a direct line of communication to the palace. Together, they form a power couple that dominates the social and political life of the capital. The fleet begins to gather in the Golden Horn. 500 transports and 92 warships, manned by 30,000 sailors. The army itself is small by Roman standards, numbering only 15,000 men. But these are not the raw recruits of the city militias. These are hardened veterans of the Persian Wars, including the elite Belisarius. Belisarius has personally overseen their training, ensuring they are proficient in the combined arms tactics he perfected at Dara. As the ships prepare to weigh anchor, a solemn atmosphere hangs over the city. The memories of the Nika riots are still fresh, the scars on the landscape still visible. But there is also a sense of destiny. The people of the East are looking toward the setting sun, toward the lands they have not seen in generations. Belisarius stands on the deck of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He is no longer the young officer from Thrace. He is the most powerful military mind in the Mediterranean. He carries the weight of an emperor's dream and the survival of a civilization on his shoulders. The rising star of the East is about to cross the sea to confront the ghosts of the West. The expedition to Africa is not merely a war of conquest. It is a journey into the unknown, a gamble of such magnitude that it will define the Middle Ages. The sails catch the wind, and the Roman fleet moves out of the harbor, leaving behind the safety of the capital for the uncertain shores of a lost world. The golden city of Constantinople sits at the crossroads of the world, a fortress of marble and salt spray where the waters of the Bosporus meet the Golden Horn. It is the beating heart of an empire that refuses to die, a place of immense wealth and deep, simmering resentments. In the year 532, the city is a powder keg. While the Emperor Justinian dreams of reconquering the lost lands of the West, the streets beneath his palace windows are thick with the scent of rebellion. This is not a war of foreign invaders, but a domestic storm that will very nearly wash away the throne of the Caesars. At the center of life in the capital is the Hippodrome. It is more than a mere stadium for chariot racing. It is a massive U-shaped arena capable of holding tens of thousands of citizens, a place where the people and the emperor meet face to face. In this era, the city is divided into two primary factions, the Blues and the Greens. These are not simply sports fans. They are organized political and social organizations, representing different classes, religious leanings, and neighborhoods. Their rivalry is often violent, and their influence is so great that even the emperor must tread carefully when dealing with them. The tension begins with a botched execution. Several members of both the blue and green factions have been arrested for a previous riot that resulted in murder. Most are put to death, but 2 men, one from each faction, survive when the gallows break. The crowd watches in a mix of horror and religious awe as the men are spirited away to the sanctuary of a nearby church. The people call for mercy, asking the emperor to pardon these 2 survivors. Justinian, however, is preoccupied with legal reforms and the heavy taxes required to fund his military ambitions. He offers a partial concession, commuting the sentences to imprisonment, but it is not enough. The spark is struck. On the 13th of January, the races begin in the Hippodrome. Normally, the air would be filled with the competing shouts of the 2 factions, each cheering for their own charioteers. But on this day, a strange and terrifying unity settles over the crowd. Instead of shouting for the blue or the green, the spectators begin to chant a single word. Nika. It is the Greek word for conquer or victory. It is the traditional cry of the races, but now it is directed at the emperor himself. The mob surges out of the Hippodrome and into the streets. The violence spreads with the speed of a wildfire. The city is soon engulfed in flames. The rioters set fire to the headquarters of the city prefect and then move toward the great palace. The fire consumes everything in its path, jumping from rooftop to rooftop across the narrow, winding streets. The original Hagia Sophia, the great church of the capital, is reduced to ash. The Senate House burns. The porticos that line the main thoroughfare of the city collapse in clouds of dust and embers. Constantinople, the jewel of the Mediterranean, is being hollowed out by its own inhabitants. For 5 days, the emperor remains trapped behind the thick walls of the palace. From the terraces, Justinian can see the pillars of black smoke rising from the ruins of his capital. The mob has found a figurehead, a man named Hypatius, who is the nephew of a former emperor. Against his will, Hypatius is crowned with a gold chain in the Hippodrome, as the crowd proclaims him the new ruler of the Roman world. Justinian is paralyzed by indecision. The administrative machinery of the empire is failing, and the guards are unsure of where their loyalties should lie. Inside the palace, a council of war is held. The atmosphere is heavy with the smell of smoke and the distant, muffled roar of the mob. Justinian and his closest advisors discuss the unthinkable: flight. Ships are prepared in the harbor below the palace, loaded with treasure and supplies. The emperor is ready to abandon his city and his throne to save his life. It is at this moment that the Empress Theodora speaks, and her words change the course of history. Theodora, a woman of iron will and humble origins, refuses to leave. She tells the assembled men that every person who is born must eventually die, but for one who has been an emperor, to become a fugitive is unendurable. She looks at her husband and tells him that if he wishes to flee, the sea is clear and the ships are ready. But as for her, she will stay. She utters the famous words that purple is a noble shroud, implying that she would rather die in the imperial robes than live as a commoner in exile. Shamed by her resolve, Justinian finds his courage. He turns to the only man he can trust to handle a crisis of this magnitude, Belisarius. The young general is still in the city, along with his personal retinue of Belisarius, his sworn household guards. With him is another experienced commander named Mundus, who leads a force of Goths. These are seasoned soldiers, men who have faced the Persians and survived the rigors of the frontier. They are not shaken by the screams of a mob. Belisarius realizes that the narrow, burning streets are no place for a pitched battle. He waits for his moment. He learns that the rioters have gathered once more in the Hippodrome to celebrate the coronation of Hypatius. The massive stadium is packed to capacity, a sea of 30,000 people intoxicated by their own perceived power. They believe they have won. They believe the emperor is cowering or already gone. Belisarius and Mundus move with silent, lethal precision. They lead their troops through the charred ruins toward the hippodrome. They do not approach from the main entrance where the mob might see them coming and scatter. Instead, they divide their forces. Belisarius leads his men toward the imperial gate, while Mundus moves toward the gate of the dromedaries. The scene inside the hippodrome is one of chaotic triumph. The people are cheering, oblivious to the steel trap closing around them. Suddenly, the soldiers appear at the entrances. Belisarius gives the order. His armored men draw their swords and charge into the packed ranks of the crowd. The rioters, mostly unarmed or carrying only improvised weapons, have nowhere to run. The high walls of the arena, designed to keep people in for the spectacle, now become their prison. The slaughter is systematic and brutal. The professional soldiers move through the tiers of seating like a harvester through a field of wheat. The screams of the dying replace the chants of victory. The sand of the arena floor, usually soaked with the blood of horses and charioteers, now turns into a crimson mire of citizens. There is no room for maneuver, and no mercy is offered. By the time the sun begins to set over the smoking ruins of Constantinople, 30,000 people lie dead in the hippodrome. Hypatius, the reluctant pretender, is dragged before the emperor. Despite his pleas that he was forced into his role by the mob, Justinian orders his execution. The bodies of the dead are cleared away, and the long, slow process of rebuilding begins. The Nika riots have been broken, but the cost is etched into the very stones of the city. In the aftermath of the storm, Belisarius stands as the savior of the regime. He has proven his absolute loyalty not just on the distant borders of the empire, but in the very heart of the capital. While the massacre in the hippodrome is a dark stain on the history of the city, it solidifies the power of Justinian and Theodora. They are no longer merely rulers by tradition, they are rulers by conquest of their own people. The city is silent now, the air clear of smoke but heavy with the weight of what has happened. Justinian looks out over the blackened scars of his capital and begins to plan a new city, one that will be even more magnificent than the one that was lost. He will build a new Hagia Sophia, a cathedral so vast and beautiful that it will seem to hang from the heavens by a golden chain. But he knows that his dreams of empire, his plans to restore the glory of old Rome, depend entirely on the man who held the line when the world was burning. Belisarius has secured the throne. Now, the emperor will ask him to cross the sea and take back the world. The harbour of Constantinople is a forest of masts and a riot of colour in the early summer sun. It is June in the year 533. The air is thick with the smell of freshly sawn timber, pine pitch, and the sharp tang of the salt spray. Along the docks of the Golden Horn, the scale of Emperor Justinian's ambition is finally made manifest in wood and iron. 500 transport ships, their hulls low in the water under the weight of grain and horses and men, bob rhythmically against the stone piers. Protecting this massive merchant fleet are 92 dromons, the swift and deadly warships of the Roman navy, rowed by 2,000 select soldiers from the capital. The city is holding its breath. Not since the disastrous expedition 65 years ago has a Roman army attempted to reclaim the lost provinces of the West. The memory of that failure, a fleet burned and a treasury emptied, still haunts the older senators and the cautious administrators of the palace. But Belisarius does not look back. He stands upon the deck of his flagship, a vessel distinguished by sails dyed in the deep crimson of imperial authority. At his side is Antonina, his wife, who has chosen to follow her husband into the dangers of the deep sea. Her presence is a testament to the personal stakes of this journey. For Belisarius, this is not just a military campaign. It is a quest for the very soul of the Roman world. The departure is a choreographed display of Byzantine majesty. Emperor Justinian and the Patriarch of Constantinople descend to the water's edge. The patriarch offers prayers for the safety of the fleet, his voice rising above the rhythmic lapping of the waves. He blesses the standards, the golden eagles, and the Christian icons that will lead the way into the setting sun. Justinian looks upon his general one last time. There is no more room for debate or hesitation. The orders are clear. Cross the Mediterranean, destroy the Vandal kingdom, and return Africa to the fold of the empire. With a signal from the flagship, the oars bite into the water. The sound is a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrates through the wooden decks. One by one, the ships begin to move. They glide past the great palace, past the towering dome of the Hagia Sophia, and out into the Sea of Marmara. Thousands of citizens line the walls of the city, waving silken cloths and shouting prayers. It is a slow, majestic procession. The fleet is so large that it takes hours for the last ship to clear the harbor. As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, the white sails of the Roman armada spread across the blue water like the wings of a great bird of prey. The voyage begins with a cautious crawl toward the Hellespont. Belisarius is a master of detail, and he knows that the success of the invasion depends on the discipline of his men long before the first sword is drawn. He organizes the fleet into squadrons, each led by a ship with a colored lantern to guide the others through the darkness of the night. At the Hellespont, they anchor near the ancient city of Abydos. It is here that the first test of Belisarius's leadership occurs, not against an enemy, but against the internal decay of the Roman bureaucracy. The army's bread supply, crucial for the long crossing, has been compromised. John of Cappadocia, the emperor's chief financial officer, has attempted to save money by baking the soldiers' hardtack only once instead of twice, and then placing it in the ovens near the fires rather than inside them. By the time the fleet reaches the open sea, the bread is moldy and damp. It is a death sentence for the soldiers. 500 men fall ill and die of dysentery before they have even seen the coast of Africa. Belisarius is a man of legendary calm, but this betrayal of his soldiers provokes a cold fury. He immediately halts the distribution of the spoiled bread and procures fresh supplies from the local towns at his own expense. He writes a scathing report to Justinian, but he does not let the tragedy derail the mission. He buries his dead with honor and commands his men to look forward. The incident serves as a grim reminder that the greatest threats to the Roman army often come from within their own administration. The fleet rounds the southern tip of Greece and enters the vast, unpredictable expanse of the Ionian Sea. The winds are light, and the progress is agonizingly slow. 4 days, the ships drift in a breathless heat. The horses, cooped up in the dark holds of the transports, grow restless and weak. The soldiers, packed together on the crowded decks, watch the horizon with anxious eyes. They are 10,000 infantrymen and 5,000 cavalry. Among them are the elite Bucellarii, the household guards of Belisarius, men who have sworn personal oaths of loyalty to him. There are also the fierce Hunnic horse archers, their bows unstrung in the humid sea air, and the federated troops from the Danubian frontier. At the city of Methone, the fleet pauses to regroup. Here, the water supply becomes an issue. The heat has soured the barrels, and the men are parched. It is Antonina who proves her worth to the expedition here. She had the foresight to store a large quantity of water in glass jars buried deep in the sand of the ship's hold, covered with thick layers of felt. While other officers struggle with foul-smelling rations, the general's table is provided with cool, fresh water. It is a small detail, but in the grueling reality of ancient warfare, such things are the difference between morale and mutiny. From Greece, they make the long jump across to Sicily. The island is currently under the control of the Ostrogoths, who are nominally allies of the Romans but wary of this sudden military build-up. Belisarius anchors at a secluded harbour near Mount Etna. The mountain looms over them, its peak shrouded in a plume of volcanic smoke, a silent witness to the ancient wars of the Mediterranean. Belisarius knows that he cannot land in Africa blindly. He needs to know the whereabouts of the Vandal fleet and the disposition of their king, Gelimer. He sends his trusted secretary and historian, Procopius, ahead to the city of Syracuse. Procopius is a man of keen intellect and sharp observation. He wanders the markets and the docks, listening to the gossip of merchants and sailors. He encounters a childhood friend who has just arrived from Carthage. From this chance meeting, Procopius learns a piece of intelligence that changes everything. King Gelimer is completely unaware that the Roman fleet is even at sea. He is so confident in his security that he has sent his brother, Caesar, with 5,000 of the best Vandal troops and the bulk of the Vandal navy to suppress a revolt in Sardinia. The path to Africa is unguarded. The Vandal capital of Carthage is vulnerable. When Procopius returns with this news, the atmosphere in the Roman camp shifts from anxiety to electric anticipation. Belisarius realizes that the window of opportunity is narrow. If he can reach the African coast before the Vandal fleet returns from Sardinia, he can establish a foothold without a naval battle that he might lose. He gives the order to weigh anchor immediately. The crossing from Sicily to Africa is a journey through ghost-haunted waters. They pass the site of ancient sea battles where Rome and Carthage once fought for the mastery of the world. Now, centuries later, the Romans are returning not to conquer a new rival, but to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs. The wind finally picks up, filling the sails and pushing the 500 ships toward the south. On the third day of the crossing, the lookout at the masthead cries out. A thin, yellow line appears on the horizon. It is the coast of Africa. As they draw closer, the yellow line transforms into white sand dunes and the distant, shimmering green of palm groves. The fleet approaches the shore at a place called Caput Veda, the Shoal of the Head. It is a desolate stretch of coastline about 5 days' march from Carthage. The generals gather on the deck of the flagship for a final council. Some argue for a direct assault on the harbor of Carthage itself. They fear the army will be cut off and starved on the barren coast. But Belisarius disagrees. He knows that a naval landing against a fortified city is a desperate gamble. He prefers the stability of the land, where his cavalry can maneuver and his discipline can be maintained. He decides to land here, on the open beach. The landing is a masterpiece of Roman logistics. The dromons form a protective arc around the transports. The soldiers leap into the surf, their shields held high, but there is no one to meet them. The only sound is the crying of gulls and the rhythmic crashing of the waves. The horses are led down ramps, their hooves finally touching solid ground after weeks at sea. Within hours, a fortified camp is established. The Romans dig a deep trench and build a wooden palisade, using the skills that have been the hallmark of their military for 1,000 years. As the sun sets over the African interior, Belisarius stands at the edge of the camp. He looks out over the dark landscape. This is the kingdom of the Vandals, a Germanic people who have ruled these lands for a century. They have grown wealthy on the riches of the former Roman provinces, living in the villas and palaces of the old aristocracy. Belisarius knows that he is not just fighting an army. He is fighting for the loyalty of the people who live here. He issues a strict proclamation to his troops. There is to be no looting. No Roman soldier is to take so much as a piece of fruit from a local orchard without paying for it. He tells his men that they have not come to a foreign land to plunder. They have come to their own land to liberate it. If they treat the locals as enemies, the locals will become enemies. If they treat them as fellow citizens, the Vandal kingdom will crumble from within. The soldiers listen in silence. They are tired, they are far from home, and they are deep in hostile territory. But as they look at their general, standing tall in his polished armor, his eyes reflecting the light of the campfires, they feel a sense of purpose. The long voyage is over. The sails have been furled. The Roman army has returned to Africa. Somewhere to the north, in the palaces of Carthage, King Gelimer is only just beginning to hear the rumors of a great fleet seen off the coast. He does not yet know that the man who will decide the fate of his kingdom has already stepped onto the sand. The wind that carried Belisarius across the sea now carries the sound of Roman trumpets, echoing across the plains, announcing the end of an era and the beginning of a reconquest that will shake the foundations of the world. The African sun hangs heavy over the dusty road leading to Carthage. It is September in the year 533. Belisarius moves his army with a cautious, rhythmic precision. He understands that he is not merely a conqueror but a restorer of order. To his left, the Mediterranean Sea shimmers like polished glass, mirroring the Roman fleet that follows the coastline. To his right, the arid landscape hides a kingdom that has terrorized the Roman world for nearly a century. The Vandal people, descendants of the Germanic tribes who sacked Rome decades earlier, are no longer the nomadic warriors of the frozen north. They have grown wealthy and settled, transformed by the luxury of their North African estates. Yet, their king, Gelimer, is a man of action and desperation. He watches from the hills, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The first major confrontation occurs at a place known as Ad Decimum, the 10th milestone from the gates of Carthage. The terrain here is a narrow defile, a natural bottleneck where the road hemmed in by hills offers a perfect opportunity for an ambush. Gelimer has devised a complex plan to surround the Roman column. He sends his brother, Amatus, ahead to hold the pass. He dispatches his nephew, Gibamund, with a cavalry force to strike the Roman left flank. Gelimer himself intends to follow with the main body of the Vandal army and crush Belisarius from the rear. It is a plan that requires perfect timing, a commodity that is often the first casualty of war. Amatus arrives at the 10th milestone too early. He leads a small vanguard, separated from the bulk of his forces. When he encounters the Roman scouts, he charges with the impetuosity of a man who believes his lineage alone guarantees victory. In the sharp, brief skirmish that follows, the Roman federates, skilled horsemen from the frontiers of the empire, hold their ground. Amatus is struck down. He falls in the dust, and with his death, the Vandal vanguard breaks and flees toward Carthage. They collide with their own reinforcements coming up the road, spreading panic through the ranks. Meanwhile, Gibamund moves across the salt plains to strike the Roman flank. He finds himself intercepted by a contingent of Hunnic horse archers serving under Belisarius. The Huns are a terrifying sight. They ride with an effortless grace, raining arrows upon the Vandals from a distance before closing in with the sword. The Vandal cavalry, accustomed to traditional charges, has no answer for the fluid, nomadic tactics of the Huns. Gibamund and his men are swept away, leaving the Roman flank secure. Belisarius remains unaware of these fragmented victories as he leads the main body of his army into the hills. He finds the valley of Ad Decimum littered with the bodies of the fallen. When Gelimer arrives with the primary Vandal force, he discovers the corpse of his brother, Amatus. The Vandal king is overcome by grief. Instead of seizing the tactical advantage and attacking the Romans while they are disorganized by the difficult terrain, Gelimer halts. He orders a burial for his brother right there on the field. It is a moment of profound human emotion, but in the cold calculus of war, it is a fatal mistake. Belisarius senses the hesitation in the air. He does not wait for the enemy to recover. He rallies his troops, pushing them forward with a sudden, overwhelming momentum. The Roman heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, armored in scales of iron and bronze, thunder into the Vandal line. The Vandals, already demoralized by the death of their prince and the strange stillness of their king, do not hold. They break and scatter into the desert. The road to Carthage is open. On the following day, The gates of the great city are thrown wide. There is no siege, no battering rams, no screaming assault. The citizens of Carthage, many of whom still identify as Romans and practitioners of the Nicene faith, view Belisarius as a liberator from their Arian Vandal overlords. As the Roman army marches through the streets, Belisarius issues a strict command. There is to be no looting. No citizen is to be harmed. No property is to be seized. He intends to show the world that the empire has returned not to destroy, but to heal. Belisarius sits in the palace of the Vandal kings and eats the very banquet that Gelimer had ordered to celebrate his expected victory. It is a moment of supreme irony. Yet, the war is far from over. Gelimer has fled to the west, into the rugged interior of Numidia. He gathers the remnants of his army and calls for his brother, Caesar, who has been campaigning in Sardinia. The Vandals may have lost their capital, but they are not yet a broken people. By December, the two armies meet again at Tricomarum, some 20 miles from Carthage. The setting is a shallow valley divided by a small stream. The Vandals outnumber the Romans, and they are fueled by a burning desire to reclaim their homes and their honor. This time, there is no complex plan, only a brutal confrontation. Belisarius knows that his cavalry is his greatest asset. He orders a series of charges across the stream, testing the Vandal center. Twice the Romans are repulsed, and twice they reform. On the third charge, the Roman line holds firm, and the Vandal center collapses. Caesar falls in the heat of the battle. When Gelimer sees his second brother die, his spirit finally breaks. He flees the field, leaving his camp, his treasure, and his family to the Romans. The Vandal kingdom, which had lasted for nearly a century and once dominated the western Mediterranean, effectively ceases to exist in a single afternoon. The Roman soldiers find the Vandal camp filled with unimaginable wealth. Gold, silver, and precious gems, much of it looted from Rome itself in the sack of 455, now fall back into Roman hands. Gelimer spends the winter as a fugitive in the mountains of Papua, sheltered by the local Moorish tribes. His life is reduced to the most basic struggles for survival. He lives in a hut, eating raw grain and sleeping on the cold earth. Belisarius sends a loyal officer, Pharas the Herulian, to negotiate his surrender. Pharas writes to the fallen king, urging him to accept the mercy of Justinian and the friendship of Belisarius. Gelimer's response is famous for its haunting simplicity. He asks for 3 things: a loaf of bread, so that he might taste the food of civilization one last time; a sponge, so that he might wash the tears from his eyes; and a harp, so that he might compose a song to his own misfortunes. When the bread, the sponge, and the harp arrive, the king sits in the mountains and sings of his fall, a melody of grief echoing through the crags. Finally, driven by hunger and the suffering of his companions, Gelimer descends from the mountains and surrenders. When he is brought before Belisarius in the suburbs of Carthage, the fallen king does something unexpected. He laughs. It is not a laugh of madness, but a laugh of profound realization. He looks at the splendor of the Roman general, the ruins of his own kingdom, and the shifting sands of the desert, and he laughs at the vanity of human ambition. He realizes that all the power and wealth he once possessed was as fleeting as a dream. The return to Constantinople is a spectacle the city has not seen in centuries. Justinian grants Belisarius a triumph, an honor traditionally reserved for the emperor alone. It is the first triumph held in the eastern capital, and it is designed to broadcast the restoration of Roman glory. The procession winds through the streets, filled with Vandal captives and the treasures of the royal house. Among the spoils are the sacred vessels of the Temple of Jerusalem, which the Vandals had taken from Rome. In a gesture of piety, Justinian will later return these to Jerusalem, fearing the ill fortune they brought to those who held them as loot. Belisarius walks at the head of the procession, but when he enters the hippodrome and sees the emperor sitting on his throne, he prostrates himself. He is a servant of the state, a man whose loyalty is as absolute as his military genius. Gelimer, too, is brought before the emperor. He refuses to bow at first, repeating the words of the preacher from the book of Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Eventually, he is moved by the emperor's clemency. Justinian grants the former king an estate in Galatia, where he will live out his days in quiet comfort, far from the sun-drenched shores of Africa. The Vandalic War is over. In less than a year, Belisarius has reclaimed a vast and wealthy province for the empire. He has proven that the Roman legions can still win decisive victories and that the dream of a reunited Mediterranean is not a fantasy. But as the echoes of the triumph fade and the golden treasures are locked away in the imperial vaults, a new shadow begins to grow. Success brings its own dangers. In the corridors of the great palace, whispers of envy and suspicion begin to circulate. A general who is too successful, too beloved by his men, and too popular with the people is a general who might one day covet the throne itself. Belisarius has reached the summit of his career, but the descent is often more treacherous than the climb. To the west, across the sea, another kingdom watches the fall of the Vandals with growing apprehension. The Ostrogoths of Italy realize that the Roman eye is now fixed upon them. The twilight of the Vandals is but the prelude to a much darker and more grueling conflict that will consume the Italian peninsula. Belisarius has restored Africa, but the heart of the old empire, Rome itself, still waits in the balance. The general prepares for his next mission, unaware that the wars to come will demand a price far greater than any he has yet paid. The glory of the Vandal victory is a brief, bright flame in an era of encroaching shadows. The dust of North Africa has barely settled on the boots of the Roman legions when the call of the West begins to echo once more through the halls of the great palace in Constantinople. For Belisarius, the victory over the Vandals is a pinnacle of achievement, yet it serves only as a prelude to a far more daunting and symbolic endeavor. The Emperor Justinian looks toward the horizon, across the Ionian Sea, toward the rugged spine of the Italian peninsula. This is not merely a quest for territory or the suppression of a rebellious tribe. This is the reclamation of the soul of the Roman world. Italy, the land of the ancestors, the cradle of the Caesars, and the home of the eternal city itself, lies under the dominion of the Ostrogoths. To the minds of the people in the East, this is a landscape of ghosts and legends, a place where the very stones speak of a lost golden age. In the year 535, a new fleet gathers. It is smaller than the massive armada that descended upon Carthage, but its purpose is weighted with a heavy sense of destiny. Belisarius stands upon the deck of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the distant hazy blue of the Sicilian coast. He carries with him the title of consul, an ancient office revived with all its traditional splendor. In Constantinople, he had been granted a triumph, the first time a private citizen had received such an honor in over 500 years. He had walked through the streets behind a carriage laden with the treasures of the Vandals, yet he did not ride in the carriage himself. He walked as a soldier among soldiers, a gesture of humility that only served to magnify his legend in the eyes of the populace and the wary gaze of the emperor. The justification for this new war is found in the turbulent politics of the Ostrogothic court. The death of the great King Theodoric has left a vacuum of power and a fractured royal family. His daughter, the brilliant and pro-Roman Amalasuntha, has been murdered by her own cousin and co-ruler, Theodahad. Justinian seizes upon this act of betrayal as a sacred cause. He positions himself as the protector of the rightful Roman order and the avenger of a fallen queen. But beneath the diplomatic language lies the singular, burning ambition to reunite the divided empire. The first footfalls in this land of ancestors occur on the island of Sicily. It is a strategic gateway, a fertile grain storehouse that has fed Rome for a millennium. As the Roman ships drop anchor in the harbour of Catania, the reception is not one of resistance, but of quiet, perhaps even weary, acceptance. The local population, long accustomed to the shifting tides of Mediterranean power, sees in Belisarius a ghost of their own past come to life. The Gothic garrisons, spread thin and surprised by the speed of the Roman arrival, offer little more than symbolic opposition. Belisarius moves across the island with the deliberate pace of a man who understands that he is not just conquering land, but reawakening an identity. In Syracuse, the ancient Greek city that once challenged Athens, the Roman banners are raised over the fortifications. The campaign in Sicily is a masterclass in psychological warfare. By treating the locals with extreme discipline and respect, Belisarius ensures that his army is viewed not as an invading force of Greeks from the east, but as the return of the legitimate sovereign. By the end of the year, the entire island is back in Roman hands, with only the fortress of Palermo offering a brief, desperate stand. The ease of the Sicilian conquest creates a sense of momentum, but the crossing to the mainland marks a shift in the gravity of the war. The Strait of Messina is a narrow ribbon of water, yet it represents a threshold between the Mediterranean world and the heart of the old empire. As the Roman soldiers step onto the soil of Calabria, they are walking into a landscape that is both familiar and alien. The roads they march upon are the same roads laid by the legions of the Republic, but the milestones are weathered and the villas of the old aristocracy are often silent or repurposed by Gothic lords. The march north through the rugged terrain of southern Italy is a slow and evocative journey. The air is thick with the scent of rosemary and pine, and the sound of the wind through the mountain passes seems to carry the whispers of the centuries. Belisarius keeps his men on a tight rein. He knows that every farmstead burned or every village looted would be a blow against the very idea of Rome he seeks to restore. He is not merely a general here. He is an ambassador of a civilization that many in Italy had begun to forget. The first true test of the campaign awaits at the walls of Naples. This is a city of immense importance, a wealthy port with formidable defenses and a population that is deeply divided. Inside the city, the pro-Roman faction argues for an immediate surrender, fearing the horrors of a siege. But the Gothic garrison, reinforced by those loyal to the new king Theodahad, holds the gates shut. They believe that the rugged walls and the sea at their back will break the momentum of the Roman general. Belisarius encamps his army outside the city, and the siege begins. It is a grueling, static affair that lasts for weeks. The summer heat begins to weigh on the soldiers, and the initial optimism of the Sicilian campaign starts to fray. The Roman fleet blockades the harbour, cutting off supplies, but the city's granaries are full. From the ramparts, the Goths mock the besiegers, confident that the Roman army is too small to take a city of such stature by force. It is during these long, quiet hours of the siege that the ingenuity of Belisarius is most clearly seen. He does not wish to destroy Naples. He wants its harbours and its wealth intact. While his engineers construct siege towers and battering rams to distract the defenders, a discovery is made by a sharp-eyed Isaurian soldier. Near the city walls, there is a section of an ancient aqueduct that had been partially blocked and forgotten. It is a narrow, dark passage carved through the solid rock, leading directly under the fortifications and into the heart of the city. In the dead of night, a small group of elite soldiers enters the aqueduct. They crawl through the cramped, damp tunnel, their armor muffled and their breathing shallow. It is a journey through the literal veins of the city. When they emerge inside the walls, they find themselves in a quiet district, away from the watchful eyes of the sentries on the ramparts. With the precision of a surgeon, they move to the gates, overpowering the guards and throwing open the massive timber doors to the waiting Roman army. The fall of Naples is a chaotic and bloody affair. Despite the orders of Belisarius, the pent-up frustration of the siege boils over, and the soldiers break into a frenzy of looting. It is one of the few moments where the general's control over his men wavers, and it is a sobering reminder of the brutal reality of ancient warfare. Eventually, order is restored, but the scars on the city remain. Belisarius spends the following days consoling the local leaders and ensuring that the Gothic prisoners are treated with a degree of mercy that was rare for the age. He knows that the eyes of all Italy are upon him, and the news of Naples will reach Rome long before he does. With Naples secured, the path to the Eternal City lies open. But the mood in the Roman camp is not one of simple triumph. The further north they march, the deeper they descend into the complex web of Italian politics and the mounting shadow of the Gothic military response. King Theodahad, criticized for his inaction during the fall of Naples, is deposed and murdered by his own people. In his place, the Goths elect Vitiges, a man of humble origins but proven military grit. Unlike his predecessor, Vitiges is a soldier king, and he begins to gather a massive host in the north, drawing warriors from every corner of the Gothic kingdom. Belisarius moves toward Rome with a small force, perhaps only 5,000 men. It is an astonishingly low number for a mission of such historical weight. He is relying on speed, the prestige of the Roman name, and the internal fractures of his enemy. As the column of dust rises from the Appian Way, the inhabitants of Rome face a choice that will define their future. The Gothic garrison within the city realize they are caught between a hostile population and an approaching legend. They choose to withdraw, slipping out of the northern gates even as the Roman standards appear on the southern horizon. On a cold December day in the year 536, Belisarius enters Rome through the Asinarian Gate. It is a moment of profound historical resonance. After 60 years of barbarian rule, a Roman general, acting on behalf of a Roman emperor, has returned to the city of Romulus. The bells of the churches ring out, and the people flock to the streets, their voices a mixture of cheering and disbelief. They look upon the soldiers, with their crested helmets and oval shields, and see the fulfillment of a dream that had seemed impossible for generations. Yet, as Belisarius rides through the Forum, past the crumbling temples and the silent monuments of the greats, he does not look like a man at ease. He looks at the vast, sprawling circuit of the Aurelian walls, miles upon miles of brick and stone that he must now defend with his meager force. He knows that Vitiges is coming, and he knows that the recapture of Rome is not the end of the war, but the beginning of its most desperate chapter. The land of the ancestors has been reclaimed, but the ghosts of the past now demand a heavy price for their sanctuary. The footfalls in this ancient soil are no longer those of a visitor, but of a guardian who must now hold the heart of the world against an approaching storm. The year is 537. The eternal city of Rome, once the undisputed mistress of the world, now sits in a state of suspended breath. Its glory is faded, its marble monuments chipped by the passage of centuries and the ravages of previous sacks. Yet, for Belisarius, Rome is more than a relic. It is a strategic necessity and a symbol of the empire he seeks to restore. He has taken the city without a drop of blood, but he knows this peace is an illusion. To the north, the Gothic King Vitiges is moving. He does not come with a small raiding party. He comes with the full weight of the Ostrogothic nation. The reports filtering through the gates speak of a massive host. Estimates are often exaggerated by the fog of war, but the reality is daunting enough. Vitiges leads tens of thousands of seasoned warriors, men who view Italy as their rightful inheritance and the Byzantines as interlopers. Against this tidal wave of steel and fury, Belisarius commands a mere 5,000 soldiers. It is a mathematical impossibility. By every standard of military logic, the city should fall within days. But Belisarius does not think in terms of numbers alone. He thinks in terms of stone, psychology, and the unbreakable will of the professional soldier. The first task is the wall. The Aurelian walls, built nearly 300 years earlier, are the city's primary defense. they stretching for 12 miles around the sprawling urban landscape. However, time has not been kind to these fortifications. There are gaps where the brick has crumbled. The battlements are overgrown with weeds, and the towers are hollow shells. Belisarius initiates a frantic, round-the-clock effort to repair them. He enlists the civilian population of Rome, a people who have not seen a real siege in generations. He orders the digging of a deep trench around the entire perimeter, creating a secondary obstacle for any Gothic charging force. He installs massive ballistae and catapults on the towers, turning the ancient brick into a modern engine of destruction. To ensure the city can endure a long investment, he stockpiles grain. He knows that a siege is a race against hunger. He fills the granaries and orders the citizens to prepare for a life restricted within the walls. But there is a vulnerability that no amount of masonry can fix. The aqueducts, those magnificent veins of stone that carry water from the distant hills into the heart of Rome, are exposed. As the Gothic vanguard arrives, one of their first acts is to sever these lifelines. The great fountains go dry. The baths, the center of Roman social life, fall silent. The city is now a dry island in a sea of enemies. The Goths arrive like a rising tide. They establish 7 massive fortified camps around the city, effectively cutting off almost every avenue of escape or reinforcement. Vitiges looks at the walls and sees a prize that should be easily taken. He believes the Romans within will quickly turn on Belisarius once the pressure of the blockade is felt. He expects a short, sharp conflict. He does not yet understand the man he is facing. Before the main siege begins, Belisarius leads a small cavalry scout toward the Milvian bridge. He wants to gauge the enemy's positions and delay their advance. It is here that he nearly loses everything. The Goths suddenly appear in far greater numbers than expected. Belisarius finds himself trapped in a desperate skirmish, his small escort surrounded by a wall of Gothic spears. He is mounted on his favorite war horse, a stallion named Phalios, a beast with a white face and a dark coat. The Goths, recognizing the general by his ornate armor and his conspicuous mount, scream for his blood. The air is thick with the sound of clashing steel and the cries of the dying. Belisarius fights not as a distant strategist, but as a front-line soldier. He wields his sword with the precision of a man who has spent his life in the saddle. His men rally around him, forming a tight circle of iron. They slowly hack their way back toward the Salarian gate, the ground behind them littered with the fallen. When they finally reach the gate, the guards inside are hesitant to open it, fearing the Goths will rush through. Belisarius, covered in the dust and blood of the melee, shouts for entry. Only when his voice is recognized do the heavy timber doors swing open. He enters the city as a hero, his presence alone enough to calm the panicked citizenry. He has looked death in the face and remained unshaken. The formal siege begins in earnest 18 days after the arrival of the Goths. Vitiges orders a general assault. He has constructed massive wooden towers, taller than the walls themselves, moved forward on creaking wheels pulled by teams of oxen. These engines of war are covered in raw hides to protect them from fire. As the towers crawl closer, the Roman soldiers on the battlements feel a cold dread. They have never seen such machines. The sheer scale of the Gothic preparation is overwhelming. Belisarius stands on the wall, watching the slow approach of the towers. His officers are anxious, urging him to order the archers to fire. He remains calm. He even smiles. He tells his men to wait. Only when the towers reach the edge of the newly dug trenches does he give the command. But he does not tell his archers to aim for the soldiers in the towers. He tells them to aim for the oxen. A volley of arrows hisses through the air. The oxen, unprotected and slow, are struck down in an instant. The massive wooden towers, deprived of their motive power, come to a dead stop in the middle of the field. They are now useless, giant wooden targets sitting in the open. The Gothic soldiers inside are trapped. Belisarius then orders his ballistae to fire, launching heavy bolts that shatter the wooden frames. The terrifying machines of Vitiges are turned into pyres of flame and splintered timber. The first Gothic assault is broken before it even reaches the wall. Enraged by this failure, Vitiges redirects his forces to other sectors, including the tomb of the Emperor Hadrian, known today as the Castel Sant'Angelo. This massive circular mausoleum has been integrated into the city's defences. The Goths launch a furious attack here, using ladders to scale the sheer stone walls. The defenders, running low on traditional projectiles, look around for anything to use as a weapon. They find the great marble statues of the ancient emperors and gods that decorate the tomb. In a moment of historical irony, the masterpieces of the classical world are heaved over the edge, smashing into the Gothic ranks below. The statues of heroes and deities become the final defense of the city they once presided over. The siege settles into a grueling war of attrition. Weeks turn into months. Inside Rome, the situation grows dire. The lack of water from the aqueducts means the mills cannot grind grain. Belisarius, ever resourceful, devises a solution. He anchors boats in the middle of the Tiber River and attaches water wheels to them. The current of the river turns the wheels, which in turn drive the millstones. Even with the enemy at the gates, the city continues to produce bread. But hunger is not the only enemy. Disease begins to spread through the crowded streets. The Roman Senate, once the most powerful body in the world, whispers of surrender. They fear the total destruction of their city. There are even plots to betray the gates to the Goths. Belisarius acts with characteristic ruthlessness and efficiency. He banishes the Pope, Silverius, whom he suspects of conspiring with the enemy, and replaces him with a more loyal candidate. He patrols the walls at all hours, rarely sleeping, his presence a constant reminder to his men that they are not alone in their struggle. Outside the walls, the Goths are also suffering. Their camps are breeding grounds for fever. The sheer number of men they have brought to the siege has become a liability, as they struggle to find enough forage in the devastated countryside. What began as a confident conquest has become a nightmare of mud and sickness. Vitiges watches as his army slowly withers away under the scorching Italian sun. Belisarius does not content himself with mere defense. He begins a series of daring sorties. He sends out small groups of highly trained horse archers, many of them veterans from his Persian and African campaigns. These riders utilize the superior range and accuracy of their composite bows to harass the Gothic camps. They strike and retreat before the heavy Gothic infantry can respond. In dozens of small engagements, the Romans inflict thousands of casualties, chipping away at the Gothic numbers and their morale. The legend of Belisarius grows with every passing week. To the Goths, he is a sorcerer who cannot be defeated. To the Romans, he is the only thing standing between them and oblivion. He is the iron wall of Rome, more durable than the stone of Aurelian. He holds the city not through sheer force, but through a mastery of psychology, engineering, and the unwavering discipline of his men. The siege will eventually last for a year and 9 days. It is a period of human endurance that will be remembered for 1,000 years. The Goths will launch assault after assault, each one more desperate than the last, and each one will be met by the same calculated, cold response from the man on the battlements. Rome, a city many thought was a corpse, proves to have one final, fierce spark of life, fueled by the genius of the last great Roman general. As the seasons turn and the Gothic grip begins to falter, the world watches in awe. The heart of the empire still beats, protected by a commander who refuses to acknowledge the possibility of defeat. Through the smoke of burning siege engines and the cries of the starving, The silhouette of Belisarius remains fixed on the horizon, an immovable shadow against the coming night. Ravenna sits like a crown in the mud. To the east, the Adriatic Sea provides a gateway to the world, yet to the west, the city is guarded by a labyrinth of treacherous marshes and stagnant lagoons. For decades, this has been the sanctuary of the Ostrogothic kings, a place where the geography itself acts as a shield more formidable than any wall. It is the year 539, and the Roman army under Belisarius has finally reached the gates of this watery fortress. The war for Italy has dragged on for years, carving a path of destruction from the southern shores of Sicily to the northern plains. Now, everything narrows down to this single point. The siege is not a matter of battering rams or scaling ladders. The defences of Ravenna are too strong for such crude methods. Instead, it is a battle of patience, a contest of wills played out in the damp, salty air of the marshes. Belisarius knows that to storm Ravenna would be to sacrifice his army for nothing. The city is reachable only by a narrow causeway, easily defended and impossible to overwhelm by numbers alone. He chooses instead to tighten a noose around the Gothic throat. His ships patrol the coast, cutting off the vital grain shipments that keep the city fed. On land, his soldiers occupy the surrounding villas and bridges, ensuring that no relief can reach King Vitiges from the north. The silence of the siege is heavy. It is broken only by the cry of gulls and the distant, rhythmic hammering of Roman engineers building fortifications that the Goths cannot hope to break. Inside the walls, the atmosphere is one of slow, agonizing decay. Vitiges, once the proud leader of a warrior people, now finds himself trapped in a gilded cage. The grain silos are emptying. The Gothic nobility, once united in their hatred of the Romans, begins to fracture. They look out from their balconies at the Roman camps and see the discipline of an empire that refuses to go away. To the north, a new and terrifying threat emerges as the Franks, led by King Theudebert, descend across the Alps. They do not come as allies to either side. They come as scavengers, burning and looting across the Po Valley, indifferent to the struggle between the Goths and the Romans. Theudebert offers his help to Vitiges, but at a price that would mean the end of Gothic independence. Belisarius watches these developments with a calculated gaze. He understands the psychology of his enemies better than they understand themselves. He knows that the Goths are tired. They are people who value strength and victory, and they have seen their kingdom carved away piece by piece. They no longer believe in Vitiges. They see a king who is besieged, a king who cannot protect them from the Roman blockade or the Frankish fires. In the mind of the Gothic elite, a radical and desperate idea begins to take root. They look at Belisarius, not as a conqueror to be hated, but as a leader to be co-opted. The Goths make a secret proposal that is as shocking as it is dangerous. They send messengers to the Roman camp with an offer that would change the course of history. They tell Belisarius that they will surrender the city and lay down their arms on one condition. They will not submit to the distant Emperor Justinian in Constantinople. Instead, they want Belisarius to become their king. They offer him the title of Emperor of the West. They promise him their absolute loyalty and the combined strength of the Gothic nation if he will only turn his back on his master and restore the Western Roman Empire with himself on the throne. For any other man, the temptation would be overwhelming. Belisarius has the army, he has the fame, and now he has been offered a crown. To accept would mean an end to the war in Italy and the birth of a new dynasty. But Belisarius is a man defined by a singular, almost impossible loyalty. He serves Justinian, even when Justinian doubts him. He serves Rome, even when Rome forgets him. However, he is also a master of the stratagem. He realizes that if he refuses the offer outright, the Goths will fight to the death behind the walls of Ravenna, and the war will continue for years. The general makes a fateful decision. He pretends to accept. He tells the Gothic ambassadors that he agrees to their terms. He will enter Ravenna, he will take the crown, and he will rule as the Emperor of the West. It is a gamble of breathtaking proportions. If his own officers find out, they might report him for treason. If Justinian hears of it, the general's life will be forfeit. But Belisarius moves forward with the cold precision of a man who knows that the end justifies the means. The gates of Ravenna, which had remained closed against emperors and invaders for generations, are finally thrown open. The Roman army marches into the city, not as conquerors over a pile of rubble, but as guests to a coronation. The sight is surreal. The Gothic warriors, men who have spent years trying to kill Belisarius, now line the streets and cheer his arrival. They look at his face, searching for the majesty of a new king. Behind them, the Gothic women watch from the windows, their faces thin from the long months of famine. They see the disciplined ranks of the Roman infantry, their armor gleaming in the soft light of the Adriatic, and they feel a sense of relief. The war, it seems, is over. Belisarius rides toward the royal palace. He does not wear the purple. He does not carry a scepter. He maintains the professional distance of a soldier on campaign. As he moves through the city, his men quietly take control of the key fortifications. They occupy the granaries, the armories, and the towers. The Goths are so blinded by their hope for a new leader that they do not realize they are being systematically disarmed. By the time Belisarius reaches the presence of Vitiges, the city is already his. The moment of truth arrives with a quiet finality. Once the Roman grip on the city is absolute, Belisarius drops the mask. He announces that he remains a loyal servant of Emperor Justinian. He has not accepted the crown for himself, but for the empire. The Goths are stunned. They have been outmaneuvered not by steel, but by a lie. Their king, Vitiges, is taken into custody. The vast royal treasury of the Goths, a hoard of gold and jewels collected over decades of rule, is seized in the name of the emperor. The dream of a Western empire under Belisarius vanishes like mist over the lagoons. The capture of Ravenna is the greatest achievement of the general's career, but it carries a bitter price. News of the Gothic offer reaches Constantinople long before Belisarius can explain his actions. In the halls of the great palace, Justinian listens to the reports with a growing sense of unease. He hears that the Goths offered his general a crown, and he hears that the gates were opened to him as a king. The emperor is a man of deep intellect, but also profound insecurity. He cannot help but wonder if the loyalty of Belisarius is truly as ironclad as it seems. He fears that a general who can win a kingdom with a word is a general who can take an empire with a sword. Justinian issues an immediate order. Belisarius is to return to Constantinople at once. There will be no triumph for the conqueror of Italy. There will be no public celebration of the capture of Ravenna. The general is recalled not to be honored, but to be removed from the source of his power. The Italian campaign is left unfinished. Although the capital has fallen, Gothic garrisons still hold out in the north, and the people of Italy are left in a state of precarious limbo. Belisarius prepares to leave the land he has fought so hard to reclaim. He looks back at the walls of Ravenna, the city he won through deception and brilliance. He has delivered the keys of the West to his master, yet he knows that he returns to a city of shadows and suspicion. Behind him, the Goths feel a sense of profound betrayal. They had offered him their hearts and their swords, and he had used them to secure a victory for a distant sovereign they would never love. As the Roman ships disappear into the horizon, heading toward the east, the silence returns to the marshes. The war for Italy is not over, it has merely entered a new and more tragic phase. The general who could have been a king returns to his emperor, carrying the weight of a victory that may yet be his undoing. The ships of the Roman fleet glide through the calm waters of the Golden Horn, their sails catching the soft breezes of the Mediterranean as they approach the harbour of Constantinople. On the lead vessel stands Belisarius. He carries with him the ultimate prize of his long and grueling campaign in Italy. The Gothic king Vitiges is a prisoner in his hold, and the vast treasures of the Ostrogoths are piled deep in the wooden bellies of his ships. By all the ancient laws of Rome, this arrival should be the prelude to a triumph. There should be a grand procession through the Mise, the city's central artery. There should be laurel wreaths, cheering crowds, and the thunderous acclaim of a populace greeting their greatest hero. But as the docks of the capital draw near, there is no sound of trumpets. There are no crowds gathering at the water's edge to shout his name. The city is strangely quiet, bathed in the long shadows of the late afternoon sun. Belisarius is not returning to a grateful empire. He is returning to a court thick with suspicion and a sovereign who has begun to fear the very brilliance of his most loyal servant. In the great palace, Justinian watches the arrival from a high window. The emperor is a man of deep intellect and restless energy, but his mind is increasingly clouded by the whispers of his advisers. They remind him that the soldiers in Italy offered Belisarius the crown of the West. They point out that the people love the general more than they love the law. Justinian accepts the Gothic gold and the captive king, but he does not offer a public celebration. The treasure is spirited away into the imperial vaults. Vitiges is given a comfortable retirement in the east, a calculated move to show that the emperor, and only the emperor, is the dispenser of mercy and justice. Belisarius is treated not as a conquering hero, but as a subordinate who has simply done his duty, perhaps too well. The geopolitical landscape of the year 540 is shifting beneath their feet. While Justinian has been focused on the dream of a restored West, a different reality has been festering on the eastern frontier. The eternal peace signed with the Sassanid Persian Empire years ago has proved to be a fragile illusion. King Khosrow I, known to history as the Immortal Soul, is a monarch of immense ambition and tactical genius. He has watched the Roman legions bleed themselves white in the mountains of Italy and the plains of North Africa. He sees the Roman garrisons in the east thinned out to provide reinforcements for Belisarius. Khosrow decides that the time of peace has ended. The Persian king leads a massive host across the border, bypassing the great border fortresses and striking deep into the heart of Roman Syria. His goal is not merely a border skirmish. He seeks to humiliate Justinian and to plunder the wealthiest cities of the Roman world. The smoke of burning villages rises into the clear blue sky of the Levant. The city of Anch, the third jewel of the empire after Constantinople and Alexandria, falls to the Persians. Its walls are breached, its treasures looted, and its population deported to the far reaches of the Persian interior. This is a catastrophic blow to Roman prestige. The restoration of the West is suddenly overshadowed by the disintegration of the East. Justinian realizes that he has no choice but to call upon the only man who can match Khosrow's brilliance. Belisarius is not allowed time to rest or to enjoy his return to his estates. He is dispatched immediately to the Persian front. But he goes as a changed man. He is no longer the commander of the elite Belisarius, his private household guard that had been the backbone of his victories. Justinian, fearing the power of such a private army, has begun to distribute these veteran troops among other commanders. Belisarius arrives in Mesopotamia with a mismatched collection of levies and demoralized frontier troops. The war in the East is a different kind of conflict than the one fought in Italy. It is a war of vast distances, of scorching heat, and of logistical nightmares. It is a chess match played across a landscape of dust and ancient stone. Belisarius finds himself facing an enemy that is his equal in every sense. Khosrow is not a desperate barbarian king like those in the West. He is the head of a sophisticated, highly organized superpower. In the campaign of 541, Belisarius attempts to seize the initiative. He moves his forces toward the fortress of Nisibis, hoping to draw the Persians into a decisive engagement. But the Roman generals under his command are fractious and divided. They have not served with him in the west, and they do not share the absolute loyalty of his former officers. Despite these internal tensions, Belisarius manages to conduct a siege of the fortress of Caesarion, capturing it and sending a clear signal to the Persian king that the Roman lion still has teeth. However, as the sun beats down on the Mesopotamian plains, a new and far more terrifying enemy is beginning to stir. It is an enemy that does not carry a sword or ride a horse. It moves silently, invisibly, through the trade routes that connect the far corners of the world. In the port of Pelusium in Egypt, a sickness is reported. It is a plague of a kind the world has not seen in centuries. It travels on the backs of rats and in the folds of merchant silk. By 542, the plague reaches Constantinople. The documentary records of the time describe a city gripped by a nightmare. At its peak, thousands are dying every day. The machinery of the state grinds to a halt. The markets are empty. The sound of the city is replaced by the grim creak of carts hauling the dead to massive pits outside the walls. This is the turning point of the age. The high hopes of Justinian's reign are buried in these mass graves. The plague does not distinguish between the poor and the powerful. Justinian himself falls ill. The emperor lies in his chambers, drifting in and out of a fevered delirium. For a long moment, the empire holds its breath. There is no clear air, and the prospect of a vacant throne threatens to spark a civil war even as the Persians remain a threat in the east. In the military camps near the Persian border, rumors fly. Officers discuss what will happen if the emperor dies. In these secret meetings, names are whispered. Some suggest that the generals should have a say in the succession. Belisarius is present at these gatherings, though his role remains a subject of intense historical debate. Does he participate in a conspiracy, or is he merely a witness to the desperation of his peers? The Empress Theodora, remaining in the capital, acts with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cubs. She manages the crisis with a steady hand, but she is also listening to the reports coming from the front. She hears that Belisarius and other generals have discussed a world without Justinian. To Theodora, this is not mere contingency planning. It is treason. Miraculously, Justinian survives. He wakes from his fever to find his empire shattered by disease and his court consumed by paranoia. Theodora presents him with the reports from the Eastern Front. The emperor's gratitude for the conquest of Italy is entirely erased by the fear of a military coup. Belisarius is recalled to Constantinople in disgrace. The transition is swift and brutal. He is stripped of his command. His remaining household guards are taken from him and incorporated into the imperial regiments. His vast wealth, the spoils of decades of war, is confiscated. The man who stood before the gates of Rome and Ravenna as a conqueror now finds himself a virtual prisoner in his own home. He is a general without an army, a hero without a country. The streets of the capital are still quiet, but now it is the silence of exhaustion and grief. The plague has claimed nearly a third of the population. The economy is in ruins. The dream of a unified Roman Empire is fading like a mirage in the desert. Belisarius sits in the shadows of his villa, watching the world he helped build fall apart. He is at the crossroads of his life, caught between his unwavering loyalty to the Roman ideal and the cold reality of a regime that no longer trusts him. He is no longer young. The silver in his hair and the lines on his face tell the story of a decade of constant warfare. He has fought Goths, Vandals, and Persians, but he finds himself defenseless against the weapons of the court. Slander, jealousy, and the fragile ego of an aging emperor have done what no enemy general could. They have broken the power of the last great Roman. Yet, even in this dark hour, the story of Belisarius is not over. The crossroads of empire are unpredictable. As the Persian threat remains and the borders of the West begin to crumble under the weight of the plague's aftermath, the empire may find that it cannot afford to keep its greatest weapon sheathed in the shadows. The crossroads are not just a place of ending, but a place where new, more difficult paths are chosen. The general waits, and the empire waits with him, suspended in a moment of profound uncertainty. The glory of the reconquest has passed, and a long, cold winter of survival is beginning. The year is 559. Constantinople, the jewel of the East, is no longer the vibrant, aggressive capital of a decade ago. It is a city of echoes and shadows. The Great Plague has carved out the heart of the population, leaving streets half empty and the tax coffers drained. Emperor Justinian is now an old man, approaching 80 years of age. He has outlived his greatest rivals and his most beloved companions. The Empress Theodora is gone, leaving him to rule in a lonely, pious isolation. The fires of his youth, the ambition to reunite the entire Roman world under one cross and one law, have simmered down to a cold, stubborn preservation. Behind the massive Theodosian walls, the citizens feel a false sense of security. But nature and time have been cruel. A series of devastating earthquakes has rattled the city, cracking the great stone bastions and causing sections of the long walls, the outer line of defense miles away, to crumble into piles of useless rubble. The Roman army, once the terror of the Mediterranean, is a ghost of its former self. To save money, Justinian has allowed the frontier garrisons to wither away. The elite regiments are scattered across Italy and Africa, trying to hold on to the fragmented pieces of Belisarius's old conquests. Then, from the vast and frozen horizons of the northern steppes, a new terror emerges. The Cotrigas, a fierce nomadic people of Hunnic descent, have crossed the frozen Danube River. Led by their chieftain Zabagan, they do not come merely to raid. They sense the weakness of the empire. They ride through the Balkans with terrifying speed, meeting almost no resistance. As the winter snows begin to melt, the smoke of burning villages rises on the horizon, visible from the very towers of Constantinople. Zabagan divides his forces. One group strikes toward Greece, another toward the Thracian Chersonese. But Zabagan himself leads the main body, 7,000 elite horsemen, directly toward the capital. He passes through the gaps in the broken long walls. There is nothing between him and the Golden Gate of Constantinople except for a panicked civilian population and a handful of palace guards who have never seen a day of real combat. Inside the palace, there is total chaos. The senators and nobles prepare to flee across the Bosporus to the Asian side. The people crowd into the churches, praying for a miracle. Justinian, elderly and frail, realizes that his city is on the brink of total annihilation. He looks through the list of his generals, but most are far away or dead. There is only one name that carries the weight of history. There is only one man who can turn a disaster into a victory. Belisarius is summoned from his forced retirement. He is in his mid-50s now, a great age for the time. His hair is white, and the many wounds of his youth ache in the damp air of the capital. He has lived in the shadows for years, sidelined by the emperor's suspicion and the petty jealousies of the court. He has every reason to refuse. He has been stripped of his commands, his wealth has been scrutinized, and his reputation has been tarnished by rumors of conspiracy. Yet, when the call comes, the old soldier does not hesitate. He walks into the city square, and the sight of him changes the atmosphere of the city. He does not have an army. The official records show that he is given a force of only 300 of his remaining veteran guards, the loyal men who have followed him from the sands of Persia to the walls of Rome. The rest of his force is a desperate collection of volunteers, local civilians, shopkeepers, and peasants who have fled the Huns. Most of them have no armor. Some carry only rusty spears or heavy wooden clubs. Belisarius leads this ragtag group out of the Golden Gate. He does not wait for the enemy to reach the walls. He knows that if the Huns see the small number of defenders, they will realize how vulnerable the city is. He must use the one weapon he has always mastered better than any other, the mind of his opponent. He marches 20 miles west to the village of Melanchas. The terrain here is narrow, hemmed in by hills and woods. It is the perfect place for a man who knows how to hide the truth. Belisarius orders his men to cut down trees and drag them behind their horses to kick up massive clouds of dust. He commands the civilians to spread out along the ridgelines, carrying flags and making as much noise as possible. He wants Zabagan to believe that a massive Roman legion has finally arrived to block the path. The Kotriga scouts return to their chief with reports of a great forest of spears and a cloud of dust that covers the sun. Zabagan, a veteran of many battles, is cautious. He knows the name of Belisarius. It is a name that has traveled the Silk Road and the steppe winds for decades. He pauses his advance, his confidence wavering. Belisarius does not give him time to think. He hides his 300 veterans in the thick woods on either side of the road. He places the untrained volunteers in the center, but well back, obscured by the dust and the terrain. When the Kotriga cavalry finally charges, thinking they are attacking a weak center, they find themselves funneled into a narrow pass. Suddenly, the woods scream. Belisarius and his 300 veterans burst from the tree line. These are the finest heavy cavalry in the world, men who have survived 100 battles. They strike the Huns in the flanks with devastating precision. At the same time, the thousands of civilians on the hills begin to shout and clash their pots and pans, sounding like the approach of a vast infantry host. The Kotrigas, caught in the narrow pass and believing they are being surrounded by an overwhelming force, fall into a panic. The horsemen in the front try to turn back, colliding with those in the rear. In the confusion, the Roman veterans cut through the nomadic ranks like a hot knife through wax. Zabagan, fearing that the legendary Belisarius has trapped him with a fresh imperial army, orders a general retreat. The Huns flee, leaving behind their loot and their pride. The threat to Constantinople is broken. A few hundred men, led by a single aging genius, have saved the Roman Empire one last time. Belisarius returns to the city. One might expect a triumph, a parade of heroes, and the eternal gratitude of a sovereign. But the gates of the palace are cold. Justinian is relieved that the danger has passed, but his old insecurities return almost instantly. He is embarrassed that he had to rely on the man he had sidelined. He is jealous of the way the people cheer for Belisarius in the streets, shouting his name with a fervor they no longer show for the emperor. Instead of rewards, Belisarius is met with silence. The emperor takes credit for the victory, claiming that his divine providence guided the defense. The volunteers are sent back to their shops and farms without pay. Belisarius is allowed to return to his private estate, but he is watched more closely than ever. The final years of the great general are a quiet, melancholic decline. The historical record becomes thin, as if the empire itself wants to forget the debt it owes him. There is a famous legend that persists through the centuries, a story that he was eventually blinded by Justinian and forced to beg for bread in the streets of the city he saved, holding a wooden bowl and crying out for a penny for the general who gave Rome back her dignity. While most modern historians believe this is a poetic fabrication intended to highlight the cruelty of the court, the fact that such a story survived speaks to the perceived ingratitude of the era. In reality, Belisarius likely lived out his remaining days in a sort of comfortable house arrest. He remained a figure of immense respect among the common soldiers, a living relic of a golden age that was rapidly fading. He watched from a distance as the empire he helped rebuild began to fray at the edges. The territories he had won at such a high cost in blood and treasure were slowly slipping away, bled dry by taxes and administrative neglect. In March of 565, the end finally comes. Belisarius dies quietly in his home. He is approximately 60 years old. Just a few months later, in November of the same year, Emperor Justinian also passes away. The two men, whose lives were so inextricably linked in a dance of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal, leave the world together. With their deaths, the door finally closes on the classical world. Belisarius was the last of the great Roman generals who spoke Latin as his mother tongue and dreamed of a Mediterranean that was a Roman lake. He was a man of the old world surviving in the new, a tactician who used the lessons of Caesar and Trajan to fight the enemies of a medieval future. He left behind no great monuments of stone, no legal codes, and no dynasty. His legacy was written in the dust of North Africa, the mountains of Italy, and the narrow passes of Thrace. He was the shield that held when the world was breaking apart. He was the sword that struck not for personal power, but for a fading ideal of Rome. The sunset of the Roman Empire was long and agonizing, but for a brief, brilliant moment, Belisarius had held back the night. He had shown that even in an age of ruin, a man of integrity and genius could achieve the impossible. As the shadows of the Middle Ages deepened over Europe, the story of the general who never lost his heart, even when he lost his emperor's favor, became a beacon of what it meant to be a Roman. The last of the Romans had finally found his peace, leaving the world to a future he had fought so hard to delay. The city of Constantinople does not stop for the death of a single man, even one who has saved its walls a dozen times over. The sun continues to rise over the Golden Horn, casting a long, amber glow across the dome of the Hagia Sophia. Yet, in the spring of 565, there is a distinct change in the atmosphere of the imperial capital. The air feels thinner, as if a great weight has been removed, or perhaps a great shield has been lowered. Belisarius is gone. He leaves behind a city that is a monument to his endurance, and an emperor who is now forced to face the approaching twilight of his own life without his most loyal servant. Justinian survives his general by only a few months. The two men, whose lives were so inextricably linked through decades of war, law, and religious upheaval, depart the world in the same year. It is a symmetrical end to an era. With their passing, the direct link to the old world of the Caesars begins to fray. The streets of the city are quiet as the transition of power begins, but the memory of the general remains, vibrating through the stone corridors of the palace and the barracks of the Thracian soldiers. Antonina, the woman who shared his triumphs and his deepest humiliations, finds herself in a world that has suddenly grown still. She is no longer the wife of the supreme commander or the confidant of an empress. History suggests she retires to a life of quiet devotion, perhaps seeking solace in the religious foundations she and Belisarius supported. There is a story that she spends her final days in a convent, using her remaining wealth to ensure that the name of her husband is whispered in prayers long after his body has turned to dust. She is the keeper of his private ghost, the one who knew the man behind the gilded armor. She knows that his greatest victory was not at Dara or Carthage, but in the simple, quiet act of remaining faithful to a crown that often sought to crush him. As the decades pass, the name of Belisarius begins its transformation from history into myth. In the markets and taverns of the empire, a legend begins to take root. It is a story that persists for centuries, though many historians doubt its literal truth. The tale describes an elderly Belisarius, stripped of his honors and his sight by a jealous Justinian. He is said to sit by the gates of the city, a blind beggar holding out a wooden bowl to the passers-by. He does not ask for riches, but for a single copper coin for the man who once held the world in his hands. He is heard to say, give an obol to Belisarius, whom fortune exalted, but envy blinded. While this story of the blind beggar is likely a poetic invention of later generations, it speaks to a fundamental truth about his legacy. It reflects the collective memory of a man who gave everything and received little in return. It captures the essence of the tragic hero, the soldier who is too successful for his own safety and too honorable for the politics of his time. Whether he died in a palace or in poverty is almost secondary to the image of his unwavering character. The legend endures because it feels right to the human spirit. It serves as a cautionary tale about the ingratitude of kings and the fleeting nature of earthly glory. Beyond the myths, the tangible impact of Belisarius remains etched into the map of the Mediterranean. The territories he reclaimed, North Africa, Italy, and the islands of the sea, remain under Roman control for a time, providing a buffer against the encroaching darkness of the early Middle Ages. His campaigns delayed the total collapse of the Roman idea by centuries. Because of him, the laws of Justinian are spread to the west, and the light of classical learning is given a few more generations to glow before the long night sets in. He did not just fight for land, he fought for the continuity of civilization. In the city of Ravenna, the silent echoes of his heart are captured in glass and stone. In the church of San Vitoli, the famous mosaics depict the imperial court in all its vibrant, eternal splendor. There stands Justinian, draped in purple, and across from him, the Empress Theodora. Nearby, a figure stands among the attendants, a man with a steady gaze and a trimmed beard, looking out at the viewer with a sense of calm authority. Many believe this is the only contemporary likeness of Belisarius. He is positioned not as a king, but as a supporter, a pillar of the state. He is part of the foundation, essential but unpretentious. To look into those mosaic eyes is to see the man who saw the rise and fall of empires and remained unmoved by the chaos. The military legacy he leaves behind is one of intellect over brute force. He pioneered the use of the heavy cataphract, the armored horseman who could both shoot a bow and charge with a lance, creating a versatile force that would define Byzantine warfare for half a millennium. His tactical manuals, or at least the traditions he established, are studied by generations of future generals. They learn that a smaller, well-disciplined force can overcome a sea of enemies through deception, positioning, and psychological pressure. He taught the empire how to survive when it was outnumbered, a lesson that would become the core of the Byzantine identity as it transitioned from a global superpower to a besieged fortress. Yet, as the 7th century approaches, the world begins to change in ways that even Belisarius could not have anticipated. The rise of new powers in the east and the migration of peoples from the north eventually strip away much of what he conquered. Some might argue that his efforts were in vain, a temporary holding of the tide. But this perspective misses the value of the delay itself. By preserving the Roman state during its most vulnerable transition, he allowed the seeds of the modern world to take root. The preservation of Greek and Roman thought, the codification of law, and the defense of the eastern gateway to Europe are all debts that history owes to his sword. He is often called the last of the Romans, a title that carries the weight of a funeral oration. To be the last of something is to stand on a precipice, looking back at a golden age while the wind of the future blows cold against your face. Belisarius was a man of the old world, a man who believed in the sacred duty of the soldier and the absolute authority of the emperor. He was a relic of an age where honor was not a luxury but a requirement. As the empire became more bureaucratic and its wars more religious, the simple, stoic virtues of Belisarius became a rarity. If we listen closely to the corridors of history, we can hear the echo of his faithful heart in every story of loyalty that defies logic. He is the archetype of the servant leader, the man who knows his worth but does not demand its recognition. His life was a long exercise in restraint. He had the power to take the crown of Italy, to lead a rebellion against a suspicious master, or to retire in bitterness. Instead, He chose to return, time and again, to the walls he loved and the duty he accepted. The sun sets over the ruins of the Roman Forum and the bustling markets of Istanbul, two cities that he knew well, two hearts of a single empire that he tried to bind together. The dust of the centuries has settled over the battlefields of Ad Decimum and the heights of Mount Sila. The armor has rusted, and the banners have faded to grey. But the story of the general who never faltered remains a steady pulse in the narrative of humanity. He reminds us that greatness is not found in the titles we accumulate, but in the integrity we maintain when those titles are stripped away. He is a testament to the idea that one man, through sheer force of will and a quiet, unyielding heart, can hold back the darkness for a little while longer. The echoes of his life suggest that while empires are fleeting and emperors are often fickle, the character of a truly faithful man is a monument that no amount of time can fully erode. As the world moved on into a new and different age, it carried with it the silent, enduring influence of the general who gave everything to a dream called Rome.